All right. Today on Cali Claptrap Integral Conversations, we have Caitlin Rose. Caitlin, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So Caitlin, I found you on Instagram and under the name Anima Rising, and you are a Tantra teacher, is that correct?
Yes.
I was hoping that you could share a little bit about how you got into Tantra, a little bit about your journey.
So with Tantra in general, like most people, I've heard about it through, yoga, and, it's become like a hot topic, especially in the past couple of years. I got into it for myself just to, this idea of practicing that my energy is sacred. And this was because, being in relationships that weren't serving me, um, working with a coach myself, she said to me, why don't you explore Tantra and explore, this realm, because I was already interested in yoga. So it was kind of like introduced to me, and it was something that kind of just like fell into my life. And it was, started with this idea of, how do I, you know, um, embody like a safe, healthy relationship? Like, how do I change this dynamic? So it was like this journey of self-love and relationships that kind of like ignited me into this path, really. So really for my own healing, that's how it started.
Okay. And you started off in sort of normal yoga. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit of the difference between maybe the yoga that's the westernized yoga that most people do here, and also sort of the difference between that and Tantra yoga.
So with yoga in the West, right? So a lot of people identify it with the asana, which is like the physical movement of yoga. So Tantra is, I guess you can say it's the philosophy of yoga. I believe Tantra is something that has come first before like what we know as yoga, right? And it's like a branch of yoga. It's like one of the branches, like, there's Kundalini yoga, there's Tantra. And in the West, it's really emphasized on, like the health and wellness movement. And Tantra, like the philosophy of Tantra, it's really very much connected to alchemy and this concept of, transmuting our emotions. And, it's very connected much to shadow work. So Tantra is really like a path of self-love. And it's the idea of, overcoming this physiology of the body, or like in order to kind of connect to our higher self. Or you could also say that Tantra is really embracing all that is. So when we think of yoga and other religions, sometimes it says that we're not the body, or we should kind of like repress our desires and, these urges. But in Tantra, everything is celebrated. So the mundane, everyday life and spiritual, there's no separation. So that to me is like a big difference compared to what we may think of yoga here.
Okay. So do you also practice the asanas in, like, do you act for you yourself? If you could also maybe, do you actually teach the philosophy along with asanas, or is it kind of its own little thing as far as how you personally coach?
So yeah, I do with like if I'm doing individual classes with the asana, the movement, there are certain asana practices. So they're very similar to like how the yoga or vinyasa. So there's the sun salutations, which, in every asana practice, that's fundamental. And Flow Tantra, which is a Tantra, the type of Tantra, or it's a branch within Tantra that celebrates the goddess Shakti. That particular Tantra, that particular asana is really focused on slowing down the body to bring us to a meditative state. So the asana itself it's traditionally it's like a 3-hour class. So it's very long, and the asana is like, you're very connected to your breath and you're moving more slowly. So that is the asana practice for that particular yoga, so for Tantra yoga. And I do that as well, like with clients that are looking to do the physical aspect of it.
Right.
And couples too.
Okay. And so one of the things, just to get into a little bit of the work that you kind of mentioned earlier, when you talk about transmuting emotions, can you talk a little bit about that?
So yeah, so the idea of transmutation is also very connected to, the Kabbalion, which is hermetic. And it's this idea of taking an emotion, whatever it is on the spectrum, and embracing the opposite side of the emotion in order to come to like a neutralized state. So I guess an actual example of transmutation in terms of emotional our well-being is, you know, learning to, if we're going to try to work through our depression, it would be to acknowledge the feelings that are come up, what is going on in the body, and embrace it by through acknowledging in order to come to a neutralized state. So it's really about embodiment, really like embodying whatever that we're feeling, and not so much bypassing our feelings.
And when you mention neutralized state, can you help me a little bit about like as far as getting a visual as far as in the practice of how a person might know that they're getting to a neutralized state?
I feel like for me, it's a feeling in the body. So if we're really centered in the body, there's not a feeling of anxiousness. It's a fundamentally a really grounded feeling. We're not overly excited about something where we're not grounded in reality, but there's not a feeling of heaviness, that we usually feel if we're feeling sad. So it's feeling very centered, I would say.
Okay. And then you also mentioned that you do work with couples, and I one of the things that interests me a lot as far as my own reading into Tantra is sort of this idea of the Shiva and the Shakti kind of energy. I was wondering, how do you kind of go about, or if you can talk a little about maybe when couples do come to you, how do you frame everything for them?
Oh, like how like we would approach the work. You mean like what
Yeah.
would the practices look like, kind of?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like some really heavy topics. If you're going to talk about, like shadow work, and also, how do we, or how would someone connect that to Tantra?
So, so based on my what I've been doing recently, so for the past year, so not too long, I would say that working with couples, it's the physical practices and really learning to be present in the relationship, whether that be like talking about the emotions or the physical act of intimacy. I say like shadow work, like in any relationship, that kind of like comes up naturally. So I know like a tantric approach to anything with just really allowing ourselves to be open to whatever it is that's kind of going on. So that could be like in the relationship, feelings, things that are coming up, or that can be like learning to be present physically with your partner and learning to like connect more with yourself so you're more open to receive your partner. And that can be
Okay.
done like through like actual like practices, like eye gazing or doing breath work together. Like those are some like tangible things that you can do with your partner,
Hmm.
that can kind of open that up and open up that space.
Okay. And where did you learn this practice yourself?
So my actual training is Durga Tiger School. It's in Ecuador. So I did my
Mm.
training online mostly because I couldn't
Hmm.
travel there due to COVID. So
Yeah.
I did my 100 hours there. I just did like a certain amount, and then everything else has been reading and diving deep into like authors and other people that explore this realm as well. So a little bit of both,
Hmm.
like self learning and then training with other people.
And what were some things that surprised you? I'm sure you're familiar with the practice before learning to be a coach. What were some things that came up for you in this practice that maybe surprised you?
Like I'd say like when I got into it, like originally, like for myself, just like knowing that the philosophy isn't, it's not about sex, like it's really
Hmm.
about inner alchemy. So it's really about self-love. So it was interesting to see like and learn the deeper side of it and what it really means. Because I think for all of us that like hear about it, like we often go you think that's what it is because that's how it's usually marketed as. So I think that for me was one of the things that was like, oh, okay, like this is more than just, intimacy. This is really a journey of the self. And,
Hmm.
it's really about, it's so much connected to other religious, other religions, and even Hermetic philosophy, which is based on, alchemy again, and, the god Thoth, and, these ancient Egyptian teachings, like every, this occult is very connected to Tantra. So all the things that I was interested in, I noticed that it really stems from this philosophy of Tantra. Like it's so much older, and it's one of the oldest, um, philosophies out there. So I thought that was really interesting too, like how it's all
Right.
connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm somewhat familiar with alchemy. When you talk about inner alchemy, are the goals similar as far as with Tantra, as far as, maybe connecting with a higher power or liberation, or how do they sort of tie in the two?
So like in alchemy, the serpent, or not the philosopher's stone, right? I
Hmm.
believe that's the term of it. I think that's the term.
Hmm.
But it's this idea that like there is gold inside of us. And with Tantra, it's, going within to find the light and joy within ourselves. Because if we don't find that within ourselves, we're not going to find that on the outside. And then inner alchemy is, this idea of duality, like merging, the logic and our intuition. And, again, like embracing duality, our masculine, our feminine, like these different aspects of ourselves. And through that, we find the gold, we transmute, and we find, this hidden treasure, that like what people call like the stone that, people are trying to find, or the fountain of youth, like these different, symbolisms, that symbols that mean, really about like inner, truth, and connecting to that higher self. So I think that's,
Hmm.
yeah, the connection with that, based on what I've read and feel about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, definitely. And so right now you offer something called intuitive wellness coaching. Is that something that you've kind of come up with on your own, or is that something that you've kind of gotten from Tantra, or what? How do you define intuitive wellness coaching?
So about 3 years ago, I actually started off doing just health coaching. That was kind of like my first, thing. And I've always been interested in, intuitive abilities and connecting more with my intuition. And I've used intuition to help clients. So I thought that maybe like merging the two, and also helping clients connect more with their intuition, not just like their inner voice, but also like their body, and like intuitive eating. So that's kind of like
Hmm.
how it's, kind of developed, at that point.
Okay. And so, what for you do you think? I mean, kind of looking at the world today, kind of speaking broadly and big picture, how is it that you think that these practices maybe can aid, um, not so much on a personal level, or maybe so, but also on a collective level? Like, do you see this as sort of there's a gap or a hole in society in which these services aren't generally, popularized or accepted, and that this stuff can help with growth? Is that kind of how you view it?
Yeah, I think the like this idea of like, self love, self alchemy, inner alchemy, I think that is something that will kind of bring more people together, because it's really
Hmm.
promoting, loving ourselves in order for us to kind of like show up in the world authentically and connect with others. I think, a lot of things that sell sometimes are usually like, manifest this, manifest the car, manifest your soulmate, right? Like,
Yeah.
have tantric sex and have an amazing, sex life, whatever. Like those are the things that kind of make people more interested in spirituality sometimes. So I think that's
Hmm.
why traditions and philosophies of yoga aren't as popular. And I think when people kind of go into this other realm of things, they will find, more sense of like contentment, and that will actually transform their life. And I think like, learning to cultivate the relationships is what really helps us grow spiritually. There's so much interesting stuff nowadays, right? Like there's, star seeds and like, aliens and all this cool stuff. And but I
Hmm.
think like the real growth, at least for me, I think happens like, can we have like fulfilling relationships with ourselves and others? So
Right. Something you said kind of, did you grow up spiritually? Did you grow up in a spiritual background?
Well, yes and no. So I actually grew up Catholic. So I went to Catholic school for most of my life. But in
Me
terms of
too.
like, yeah, it's fun. Well, kind of yes and no. I went to Catholic school until eighth grade, so for a long time. But in terms of like this, like yoga and like learning about like tarot and all that, I'm like the only person like in my immediate family that practices.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. And I think, maybe since we come from similar backgrounds, we could both speak to sort of the disembodiment that maybe at least I received from the Catholic tradition. I mean, it was very powerful, but the things that they tend to shun or mark as taboo, I think, at least that what attracts me to Tantra, because you find, like, for example, when you mentioned desire, desire is sort of marked as a sin. And then sort of when you're walking around the earth and you have these desires going on, you're like, okay, well, does that mean I'm going to hell? Does this mean I'm a sinner? And so for me in my own searching, trying to find something where my I had some peace of mind going throughout the day that it's because I'm a natural human being. I'm not going to be sent to damnation because of this. So I was wondering, do you find that that the going to tantra, does that practice help maybe sort of make make you more spiritual, make you more whole in your opinion?
I feel yes, only because I think a lot of us, and I think this is just conditioning for most of us, right? Like we think through being religious or, learning these cool spiritual techniques like astral projection is what makes us more spiritual. But for me, I think it's really learning to be human and just embracing our humanity. Because I think as a whole, like we're naturally spiritual. I think all of us have intuitive gifts. We're naturally connected to spirit. It's really learning to embody, being human, being a spiritual person and this human experience that is really the challenge. And I think through embracing that part of ourselves, we're able to connect more with our spirituality. So I think it's like learning to embrace all of it because that's how we connect more. At least that's how I feel about that. Not so much like I
Yeah.
think it's the opposite sometimes, like connecting more, like more grounding, like, feeling spiritual in the everyday life, not in the sense where we have to escape life to be spiritual.
Hmm. I've noticed also, it seems, at least maybe on social media, I see a lot more of it, but sort of this, a lot of, I would call it maybe a goddess movement. And as far as women really embracing sort of the goddess, and I was maybe hopefully you could talk a little bit about how important that is. I know growing up Catholic, well, with other than Mary, maybe there was this really sort of masculine projection of religion and stuff. I was wondering if you could maybe speak to a little bit if Tantra brings up sort of that goddess energy, and how important it is for women to maybe embrace that.
Yeah, so Tantra does celebrate, the goddess, so as the creator. And I think, with women or even like men who maybe identify with the feminine energy more than the male, because I met some men, who feel that way. So whatever energy you resonate, I think as a general, like this feminine energy is what kind of helps, balance this, overly masculine energy that has been going on in the collective. And I think for a woman, like, when she embodies that feminine, I think it just, naturally will affect other people around her. And I think that goes for masculine energy too. But I think, this
Hmm.
idea based on like this philosophy and what, people have been feeling, I think feminine embodiment is just, it's kind of just a way for like the collective to kind of like counterbalance the energies that have been going on for many years. Because even back so many years ago, like just the idea of female, females, and just this idea of like really being comfortable with your body has been shamed for so long. And
Hmm.
I think this feminine energy kind of goes towards that, like learning to embrace, nature and ourselves. That's how I view it with feminine
Yeah.
embodiment.
And when you think of the masculine energy in most people, how do you usually talk or discuss about how someone might know that one thing is masculine energy and another thing is feminine energy?
I think it's like a feeling, like at least like something that you kind of just maybe know intuitively?
Hmm.
Like, you mean like how do you know what is feminine energy versus masculine energy? Is that your
Do
question?
people? Yeah, I mean, I think I would say I also have sort of an intuitive sort of grasp of maybe what I label as feminine, what I label as masculine. But I was wondering if people are ever confused, or maybe how you educate people on how to identify. Well, this is more of a goddess Shakti energy, and this is more of the masculine Shiva energy. And I was just wondering, is there any? Do you come across any clients that maybe have difficulty differentiating the two, or like most people, is it pretty intuitive to them to know, okay, well, this is masculine, this is feminine?
Yeah, I think for me, like with clients, I find that it's mostly intuitive. I've had met others though that like, like I have a really good friend that he's a male, but he defines himself as, feminine. And I think like with
Hmm.
Tantra, like, I've been in situations where, some like they know, but it's like we identify masculine and feminine as a gender thing. So I think it's also like how to like go above this idea that it's actually a gender thing, because like it's when we describe tantra we often think like the physical male and the physical female. So I think what gets confusing sometimes is, can I be a woman and identify with the masculine? And that kind of goes into like other different topics as well. But that's something that I've been seeing often too, like with people I've
Mm,
worked with and been talking to, even with friends, like that has
yeah,
been something that has come up. Like, can you be, a female and embody the masculine? Can you be, and vice versa?
yeah. It made me, first of all, I don't want to lose my train of thought. Going back to that, the male that kind of identified more with the feminine energy, it doesn't necessarily mean, for example, I was curious, is that person, does he identify as a heterosexual or homosexual? It doesn't necessarily equate to, for example, he could be heterosexual but still identify more maybe with the feminine energy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
It
Well,
doesn't have to connect the two?
yeah, what I've been finding is like people who maybe identify themselves as non-binary, or
Mm-hmm.
they are homosexual, and they it's not like the traditional like heterosexual couple. I notice like couples that are not heterosexual, one will embody the female and one will embody the masculine, even though they're the same gender. And that has been something that has been coming up. And I think like in the community of tantra, when we think of tantra, we think just the female and that, like the actual female and the actual male. And I think that's obviously like that's natural. But I've been finding that there are a lot of different like couples that you know like curious and knowing like can you still embody, like, because in every relationship I feel like there's duality and there's polarity. So I think that is
Right.
something that has been coming up, because now everyone is more accepting, at least we hope so, right? Like with different types
Mm-hmm.
of situations and couples and relationships. And yeah, that has been something that I've been seeing a lot, and have those conversations with other couples that feel that way.
Yeah. I was speaking, I have a couple kids, and I was talking to my pediatrician a year or so ago, and he was saying, has as many visits as he received in the 90s for sort of like anorexia and sort of eating disorders, as many as were happening then, he's seen as much sort of people coming in for sort of these non-binary issues of gender sort of confusion. I'm not even sure how you call it or label it, but I thought, it's sort of interesting if you sort of look, as far as what's going on, and to find that, kids are growing up, and maybe it's a good thing as far as questioning sort of, how they identify. But I think there's definitely something new that's happening, that's emerging, that's new, that maybe it's just more accepted, like you were saying, and that's why you're hearing more of it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my other questions, I know you sort of talked about, and I think you mentioned on Instagram, as far as, people just thinking tantra is about sexuality, and maybe receiving messages that's, sort of all about, that kind of a thing. I was just wondering, how do you, is it a nuisance? Do you sort of redirect them, sort of, does it attract the wrong people, or how does that sort of, how do you navigate usually that in your profession?
So like at first I just get angry and I'd be like, why would you think this? And then they think because I'm this I am for the most part open, right? Like, most people are, right, in this industry, but I
Yeah.
guess I just ignore it, or I just be honest and say like, no, this is not what I do. If you really look into what I do, like, I don't know where you
Yeah.
get this. And I honestly think like, and most of the time it's an excuse to, like, a lot of people like to use certain things as a way, like, to approach someone a certain way and then,
Mm-hmm.
revert
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
it has been interesting. I'm sure like a lot of people get the same stuff. So
Yeah, definitely. I was looking over your blog and I thought something I had never heard before, but I thought was really interesting. I'm not sure if it was done too long ago for you to kind of talk about it, but there was something you mentioned about the cosmic egg. You remember that
oh,
blog post? And I'm not sure if it
yeah.
was too far to go because I didn't ask you to really speak about it. But as far as the way it was mentioned, you kind of talked about it was before sort of the male and female differentiated, and out of chaos was this egg, and around the egg was the serpent. And I just thought it was a beautiful visual. I've never seen it before, but I definitely thought it tied into a lot with the sort of the tantra motif. And yeah, I don't know if do you recall that blog at all, or was it too
Yeah,
long ago?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So the cosmic egg, it's believed that this egg that cracked open is what formed duality, masculine, feminine, and before anything, there was nothing. There was
Yeah.
nothing. There's just, or you can say darkness,
Hmm.
and it's kind of, like I don't know the exact terms on the Hebrew terms of the tree of life, but the first one, the main one, represents that, and then when it flips, there's the feminine. I think it's wisdom, and or I forget the terms, but there's two, and they're on the
Hmm.
second part of the tree of life, and that kind of represents this cracking opening of the egg, and
Yeah.
with this duality is creation, like this concept of light, dark, masculine, feminine is what is creation as a whole. So I thought, yeah,
Hmm.
the symbolism is really cool. I love that picture
Yeah,
as
definitely.
well.
And sort of my last question was sort of, how I look at Tantra as sort of this being this non-duality, philosophical sort of system or ways of being and stuff. And just for your, when I've been looking into it as far as, sort of the embracing, let's just say you're a vegetarian, and my idea of people who practice Tantra is occasionally they will eat meat to not sort of just embrace sort of the duality and of sort of the universe and stuff. And I was just wondering, in your own practice, do you is that something that you can relate to, or that you also bring in, or is that sort of a different approach?
Oh, you mean like with being like vegetarian, like do a
I know, I sort of reading through your blog and stuff, it seems
yeah,
you eat mostly a plant-based diet, which is great, right? But I know with Tantra, sometimes it purposefully, consciously brings in sort of that other element that you maybe is say, okay, well, this is evil or not good. But occasionally for
right.
Tantras, do you bring in something? How does a person who does practice this usually embrace their own sort of duality that they kind of go through life with?
Yeah, I feel like it's just being conscious whatever it is that you're doing, right? Like I feel like if you're conscious about it and it's aligned for you, whatever that is, I guess that's your own path. I mean, even as a health coach, I usually have never like told people like what to eat or what's better for me personally. A certain diet kind of works best for me, but I think like if I'm, in my mind, like I try not to eat, animal products. I try to eliminate them only because of my personal beliefs. But I think
Right.
everyone has their own. Like I don't think it's a way of saying like you have to do something. Even in my
Hmm.
teacher training, a teacher did actually bring that topic up. She mentioned there was a couple that was vegetarian or vegan, and that they served fish, and that they were really really upset about it. And they said, well,
Mm.
you're a tantra, you're spiritual, why are you eating animals? And we had this conversation, and she said that it's like this idea of like they didn't think of it as bad to eat the fish because they thought of it as like this is nature, this is being gifted to us, And someone else who isn't vegan may say like, okay, like that's wrong, that's horrible. I think it's really like your own, how you choose to look at something. But I do
Right.
think the way animals are treated is, not right. And like that's my take on it. But like in
Yeah.
Ecuador, where life is different and people are out in
Mm-hmm.
nature, it may not be perceived in that way. You know what I mean? Because it's not the
Yeah.
same life
Yeah.
that an industry like the food industry is not like probably how it is in the States. You know what I mean? So it depends
Right.
on where you're at, really.
Yeah. And I said it was my last question, but another one came up for me when I asked you that one was, so did you technically have a guru in this class as when you were doing the coaching or the teaching to learn?
I didn't like get to connect with the teacher as much as I wanted to. So
Mm-hmm.
no, and that's the thing with Tantra, because traditionally, you do work with a guru.
Mm-hmm.
I personally haven't found, like someone to work with like in depth the way I wanted to, but
Yeah.
I've had
Right.
spiritual teachers in my life, with healing, not in this, with the asana and with the actual practices. I mean, I did do a
Yeah.
teacher training last year in Bali, and I did work with a woman who I thought was amazing.
Mm.
And she was probably like the closest thing as a guru to me, because she was very
Yeah.
she didn't practice tantra, but she's a yoga teacher. She's she knows yoga philosophy. She's from the island, so it's like
Mm-hmm.
her life, and it's not something she just got into. Like, she's been a spiritual teacher for years, and I think that was more like maybe like a guru for me than the last time I did a training.
Yeah. Well, that presents another question. Can you talk a little bit about what you got from her?
She really went in more into like the philosophy of yoga, and she was a Kundalini yoga teacher. So
Mm.
she talked more about like the energy of the Kundalini, and she talked about more like the philosophies and the values, or the, I guess you could say, the yamas and the niyamas of yoga, which is basically like philosophical, like how you live life and your values
Mm.
and
Mm-hmm.
such. So it's more like the philosophy of yoga more than anything.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, hopefully I could have you on again and could ask you more about that, because I think if you just kept digging, it would present a lot more questions and stuff. I'll share where people can find you in the description, but I was hoping maybe you could just tell people where they can find you.
So yes, Instagram, Anima Rising, ANIMA Rising _, and then my website is www.animaintuitive.com. Instagram is probably the best way, but I do have a website with my email, which people can reach me as well.
Awesome. Caitlin, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. It was fun.
Awesome.